Welcome to our event this evening, California 2022 Legislative Review with Kathy Dervin, Ralph Dennis, and William Barrett. We welcome you to post in the chat, where are you zooming in from, and maybe a little bit about yourself. Before we start, I want to inform you that we are recording in case you missed the little message. Also, we want to acknowledge that San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. SFBay PSR organizes physicians and other health professionals to defend health and demand racial, social, and environmental justice. By combining the power of community activism with the knowledge and credibility of health professionals, we promote public policies and support our intertwined areas of concentration: environmental health and the climate crisis, nuclear weapons abolition and diverting funds away from warfare and toward healthcare, social and racial injustices and the health burdens of vulnerable communities, and education of the public and the next generation of health professionals. Our 2022 events series focuses primarily on deepening our understanding of the connections between these core areas. Please join us on Wednesday, April 27 at 6 p.m. for Building Electrification, Climate, Health, Equity. We will have a panel of experts who will dive deep into the issues and answer all of your questions. To learn more about events, resources, and how you can take action or donate, please visit our website at SFBay PSR, sign up for our newsletter, events, and action alerts, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. As you listen to the speakers, please post your questions in the chat or hold them and ask in person at the Q&A. During the Q&A, we invite all of you to show your video and join the discussion. We hope this event will be an opportunity to build community. Now, I'd like to hand the mic to Dr. Robert Gold, President of SFBay PSR. Bob?
Hi, everyone. It's Bob Gould here, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our 2022 Legislative Review, where we have a lot of informative speakers addressing various legislative proposals. Are you wondering what proposals we should be watching and supporting in the 2022 session of the California Legislature, or how to lend your important health voice to support the equitable and just implementation and regulation of environmental policies? We're delighted tonight to have a number of great policy experts who will review legislative efforts related to environmental health and the climate crisis and explore opportunities to advocate strategically on all of these issues. This year, San Francisco Bay PSR will be specifically focusing on bills and regulations related to air pollution, building electrification, setbacks from oil wells, EV and solar rooftop, transportation, and an equitable and just transition to a green economy. So I want to very briefly welcome all of our great speakers who will be here tonight, and I'll follow in their individual segments with more comprehensive background on what the expertise and experience of bringing there. Our speakers tonight include Kathy Dervin, who will be leading off and addressing the California legislative schedule, pathways that we could explore to influence policymakers and regulatory agencies, and the various budgets involved in that. She'll be followed by Ralph Dennis, who will be discussing bills related to building electrification, setbacks from oil wells, also EV issues, solar, rooftop, all those connected concerns of ours. And finally, Will Barrett will be discussing bills related to air pollution and transportation. And all of that will be followed by hopefully a very robust question and answer period. So let's start off tonight's agenda with a longer introduction to our dear friend and colleague, Kathy Dervin. Kathy is a co-founder of 350.org Bay Area, and she served on Sierra Club committees, including their international committee delegation to UN Climate Change Conference in Paris in 2015. She has held positions as senior policy analyst at the Center for Climate Change and Health, and as well as the Public Health Institute in Oakland, and with the California Department of Public Health Center for Climate Change and Health. She coordinated and co-authored the state's plan Preparing California for Extreme Heat and integrating public health and climate action planning, that for city planners. So Kathy, it's just once again a pleasure to have you speak to us, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's great to be with you again this year. So I'm going to give an overview of the state government climate policy work, mainly the legislature, but a few other areas that relate to how what the legislature passes actually gets implemented, and the role that health professionals can play in advocacy on all of those fronts. I can see there's a lot of actually experts on the call tonight, so this will be repetition for those of you that know the legislative process, but hopefully it will be helpful for those of you that are a little bit newer to that. So, oops. Okay, so again, thanks a lot to Julie and Jasmine and Bob and the crew at SF Bay chapter of PSR. I've been a PSR member. I was just thinking back since I was in public health school in 1981. So all the issues being raised around nuclear weapons and nuclear war go back to the work I joined PSR as a public health student. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here and happy to take questions at the end. Ralph and Will are really going to go into more details about particular policies, both on the regulatory front and the legislative front. So I'm going to give this overview and hopefully it will be helpful. Oops. It's not advancing. Jasmine, could you maybe help me? It's not, for some reason, it's not. Here we go. Okay, so this is the basics, but it all adds up. It's like, kind of a puzzle. And the more you learn, and you're always learning if you're doing legislative work in California, you're always learning. Just really basic, like who's involved. So the governor and the executive branch, which has, I don't know, dozens, 50, 60 state agencies, not all of which are involved in climate, but many of which are. The Assembly has 80 members, the Senate has 40 members, and that will become critical when we look at like how you pass bills and how many votes you need. The Democrats in the legislature have what's called a supermajority, but not all of the members on the Democratic caucus actually support strong climate and climate justice bills. So that's something that advocates have to contend with frequently. Then there's, in that mix of the legislature, there's key leaders, people that have leadership roles, and you kind of want to know a little bit about them because they can be extremely influential and help you pass something, or you might want to be in touch with leaders like that. And then there's important committees that climate justice, environmental justice bills tend to go through. So there's many committees that deal with environment, climate, justice issues and the intersection. And I like the way Julie talked about kind of climate, health, and equity, because that is really the nexus we're talking about as looking at the health role. And then the calendar. So here we are, almost April, March 30th. And the legislature started on January 3rd for their session, which is the second year of a 2-year session. California has a 2-year legislative session. Somebody just told me, and it runs for about 8 to 9 months. Somebody just told me Oregon had finished their session and it was 2 months long. So California has a really professional legislative session and all the rigor and detail that goes along with that. So getting involved now is a perfect time because bills have been introduced and they're starting to move through one of the 2 houses. And then as the season goes on through August 31st, which will be the last day of this legislative session, there's a huge rush the last 2 weeks of the session to pass things in their final house. And then after that, the governor has 30 days to sign, veto, or take no action on bills. So just to give you some orientation to where are we in the calendar. Then just what are the key issues that California is working on? California has a long history going back to the early 2000s of tackling climate issues, but kind of what's on the drawing board now with the sense that we're in a climate emergency, that we have to really speed up what we're doing. These are just some of the areas that I pulled out. So we need a more rapid phase out of fossil fuels. That's oil and natural gas. We don't really use very much coal in California. We need to move towards 100% clean energy. That includes energy efficiency. The energy we don't use or we use more efficiently will help us reach 100% clean energy, and then getting all the renewables, wind, water, solar, geothermal online. Clean transportation is absolutely critical. And I know Will's going to talk more about transportation. Whoops, sorry about that. 41% of all greenhouse gas emissions and many air pollutants come from the transportation sector. So that's key. There's industrial sector that uses a lot of energy and puts out a lot of pollution. Agriculture and food is another sector. Land use and housing, I've been hearing a lot about kind of the connection again between climate, housing, equity, affordability. Plastics come from oil. And so that's another big issue. And then there's direct health impacts on climate. There's natural lands and forests and water. There's a Green New Deal coalition in California that is promoting equitable solutions to climate that make sure resources are there for low income and EJ communities, and in particular, a just transition or a high road transition for workers in the oil and gas industry. And we're beginning to see much more legislation on adaptation and resilience because we are already in climate change. The climate impacts are here and now, not just wildfires, but all of them are starting to have impacts. We're in a drought. I'm going to talk a little bit about heat tonight. So, and then another issue, those are things we're for, or we're trying to find the solutions, pathways to enact, implement, fund so those solutions. But at the same time, sometimes we have to fight things that are bad proposals. And what those generally are called in the advocacy world, false solutions that do not actually get us to no more fossil fuels being extracted, shipped, processed, refined, and used. Or new technologies that are unproven. So I'll talk a little bit about that, like carbon capture and storage. So that's kind of a overview of some of the, what are the issues that fall into climate and climate justice. And there's huge amounts of opportunities, small and large, for health professionals to be involved. So if you take one thing away from my presentation tonight, it's that it's very important. Your voice matters. You can have an impact. You have credibility and standing. You're scientists, you're trained, you know your fields, you know your patients or your healthcare facilities or your public health work. And that really needs to be turned into the kind of action that can impact climate policy. You can connect with other advocates through groups like PSR. You're already here through them tonight, but other health groups, let's say you're an emergency room physician or a pediatrician or a family physician, many professional associates or a public health worker. Many other health groups are also getting involved, or they need to get involved. So you have an opportunity to work with and connect with them. And there's all kinds of issue coalitions that work on the things I talked about on the previous slide. Then you want to get involved, and you probably want to get involved in specific bills. So there's, don't feel overwhelmed if you're new at this. There's a lot of groups and people and information online and trainings that can help you learn the ropes. But actually, if you've found your way through your own facility or institution or workplace to get things done, you're going to understand the process of legislation, and you just need to learn some more details of how the legislative process works. But believe me, you have the skills and the knowledge and the advocacy kind of passion to make a difference in this area. So once you identify a bill, and I'm going to give you an example in a minute, you want to learn who's working on it, who else is working on it, and what are the key pro and con points on that bill. And then obviously through this whole calendar between now and August, there are going to be key times to take actions when bills are being voted on. And what are those actions that you can take? So I just listed a few of them. Again, many of you have already done these things either professionally or in advocacy in some other area. So, you know, connecting up with groups that are planning legislative action on these issues is going to really help you. Obviously, you know, op-eds, physicians, nurses, public health leaders writing op-eds, you know, that gets a lot of attention because of the credibility and the experience you have in the community of taking care of people's health. So there's a lot of ways to advocate. I'm going to give an example. It's something I've been involved in, but it's actually become quite prominent this year. So in 2012, I worked on a state planning process to develop a plan with 12 state agencies called Preparing California for Extreme Heat. And this is the problem with, you know, doing things in isolation or not making sure that you have the right support. We passed this great plan in the state health department, and it never got implemented. That was in 2012. So here we are in 2022, where 2 bills are really addressing the need for the state of California to really come up with extreme heat planning and surveillance bills. So there's 2 that I listed here, and you can get these slides later to read up about them. And we need to do this now. It's actually, we're way overdue making these things real, scalable, out in the community and addressing the most vulnerable populations. So on these bills, how could you get involved? You want to know where the bills are in the legislative process, what committees they're in, who's working on them, and what are the pro and con arguments? Are there people that are against these bills? Maybe hospitals don't like that they might have to report. So you have to work with the opponents of a bill to make sure that amendments or changes are agreed to. And then what role can health professionals play? Obviously, heat is one of the greatest health impacts of climate change in the world, actually. And it's kind of invisible. And so it's really important that we do this. So that's just an example of one area of bills. Again, Ralph and Will are going to talk about some more specific areas. I just wanted to give you that example. And then the legislature also interacts with the governor about the state budget. And we happen to have huge surpluses last year and this year because capital gains of the wealthier people in California are just growing and growing in leaps and bounds. So money is pouring into the state. And so there's a huge surplus. And both last year and this year, Governor Newsom actually did propose quite a lot of funding for climate programs. And there may even be more money by the time they vote on the budget in June. So since we're in a climate emergency, we don't have all the time in the world. We need more resources to make the changes we need before 2030 and certainly before 2045. So there's a lot of attention this year pushing for more money for climate and environmental justice programs to achieve those goals faster. California has a lot of good goals, but if they're not implemented, we're going nowhere and we're losing time that really can't be recoverable. And then in the budget, so a lot of people, rather than just focusing on bills, like, 10 bills, are also advocating in the budget arena. And that also goes through budget committees. So for example, if you live in San Francisco, Phil Ting, your assembly person, one of your assembly people, is the chair of the Assembly Budget Committee. He's one of those leaders I talked about who you want to kind of get to know and be able to talk to. And know how to make the case or advocate for something in particular. And I know Will is involved in some of these budget actions too. So I just listed some of the areas where whole coalitions are just working on trying to get more money for the solutions we already have on the books. We know what we need to do, and we just don't have the resources to do it fast enough or to scale. And let me just, sorry. To keep going. So those are just some areas, that those budget advocacy efforts and, health professionals can be really helpful in that regard too, because if we don't do things, there are health costs associated with inaction. So it's really valuable to have the health voice and health expertise there. Then what happens when bills get passed? they go into that executive branch of all the state agencies where either there's planning needed or rules or regulatory action that has to be taken. So the legislature is not the only place to make these changes and to promote them. There's many state agencies involved in implementing different climate and climate justice policies. You don't have to learn about all of them, but you may become an expert in, or feel like something there is interesting for you, like air pollution is under the California Air Resources Board, and there's 2 physicians on that board. So that's a natural kind of way for physicians and health professionals to plug in. And let me just leave you with, so there's a lot there, and there's pieces of it you can kind of learn about and become active in or become more active in. But let me just tell you, many agencies do not have enough health expertise or hear enough from health professionals and groups. So your expertise really matters. And the one area I'm just going to show that in is the effort to get setbacks from oil and gas drilling with an agency called CalGEM, which is in the Natural Resources Agency, Department of Conservation. It is the agency that regulates oil and gas drilling in California. And there's been a multi-year effort to require health protective buffer zones called setbacks between sensitive receptors, meaning vulnerable people, and oil and gas operations. And in the legislature, we've been unable to pass a setbacks bill for 4 years. So it didn't work in the legislature. What other avenues can advocates and especially frontline communities who are impacted by oil and gas the most use? So they pressured the governor and this agency CalGEM to actually develop a rule, which is in the process of being promulgated now. This coalition is led by a coalition of frontline and environmental justice groups called Vision. And they have been pushing to adopt public health rules that actually protect their communities that are closest to oil and gas. And PSR Los Angeles has been one of the leaders in Los Angeles of this effort. There, 100 groups have worked together to generate 65,000 comments on this draft public health rule, which includes a 3,200-foot setback between the vulnerable populations and the oil and gas operations. And that is under development now. So there's opportunities right now to get involved in that. And I just listed a few tools that people can take a look at. There's a scientist letter that just to the governor saying why we need these setbacks, and there's a webinar on April 6th, and I'm gonna end on that. I know I did this really quickly, but happy again to answer questions later. So I'm going to turn it back to Bob.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for just a really terrific overview. That's so helpful to frame all of these issues and the work that we need to move on. Our next speaker is Ralph Dennis. He's a legislative analyst for 350 Bay Area and the lead person of their Clean Energy Action Team. He's a member of Solano Climate Policy Team, part of the San Francisco chapter Climate Reality Project, and is active with his local SURGE group, or Showing Up for Racial Justice. His work experience includes directing regulatory affairs for energy consulting and retail energy marketing companies, and over 20 years with the Kentucky Energy Office and the Public Service Commission, where he helped manage natural gas issues and formulate the commission's natural gas policies. Mr. Dennis has a BA in political science and history from Eastern Kentucky University, and he's completed an additional graduate work at Eastern Kentucky University and the University of Tennessee with an energy and environmental focus. He and his wife, Vicki, are 8-year residents of California. So welcome, Ralph, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Bob. And I want to thank Bob and Julie and Jasmine for the invitation tonight. It's a pleasure to speak before the SF Bay PSR group, and I hope the information I share with you tonight on some specific bills that we're tracking or watching very closely is helpful, and if not on your radar, then perhaps may pique some interest, and we'll be happy. And if so, then we'll be happy. 350 will be Bay Area Action will be happy to work with you in supporting, opposing, taking whatever positions necessary. So let me bring my screen up. And Oops. There we go. Okay, so as Bob said, I'm with 350 Bay Area Action. I'm a legislative analyst. And yes, I'm from Kentucky. It is hard to not say Kentucky without thinking about McConnell. I could share lots of stories with you about fighting McConnell in his multiple Senate races to get reelected, but this isn't the time or place for that. But I will start by mentioning, I'm often asked by folks who I talk with about climate action steps that are needed to be taken. You know, what's the term 350 referred to? So I started adding this little blurb down at the bottom here I found from a friend here in Benicia. That's in 350, if you don't know, 350 simply refers to the level of CO2 emissions that should not be exceeded in the atmosphere to maintain the type of climate in the type of situations we want here on the planet. So 350 refers to the level of CO2 emissions that should not be exceeded in order to maintain the type of living that we're used to in terms of atmosphere and climate. So just briefly, before I talk about the bill, just to let you know that the 350 Bay Area that we talk about is actually two organizations. The one on the left side, 350 Bay Area, is more program oriented. And the one on the right is where I'm located, the legislative committee, which is action teams. This one is a C3 and one is a C4 for tax purposes. So the program folks have to be a little more careful about interactions with legislators and things like that. Whereas the action teams on the right, that's pretty much all we do. There's, in addition to the Ledge Committee on the Bay Area Action side, there's also an electoral accountability team that focuses on election cycles and candidates in the Bay Area and finding out where they stand on positions and asking them why they are or are not on the right side of the issues. And then, as you notice, the action under the Legislative Committee Action, we actually have five teams, three that specifically relate to topical areas within the climate actions we want to take. One, eliminate fossil fuels. One's the clean energy that I facilitate, and then the transportation lands. And then we also have a federal action team. And then what we do is legislative work, and we do that in three general areas. We work with legislators, build relationships with them, as Kathy was describing, try to educate and lobby them. We're all volunteers though, so none of us on the Ledge Committee side, at least none that I know of, are on the paid staff. So we're all volunteers, but we do lobby. We also work on legislation. We're in the middle of all that now, of course, as well, with tracking bills and attending hearings largely by Zoom and stating positions to let the legislators know where we are, in addition following up our support letters or opposition letters. And then we educate and mobilize through our partner groups that we work with regard to sending information documents, sending letters, and doing actions. And so those are the three general areas in terms of how we do our work. And in addition to the focus on the legislature, as Kathy also referred to, there are some regulatory agencies where some of the bills that were successful in getting passed are ones that we've opposed, but maybe unsuccessful in getting not passed. Bills that do pass go to agencies for implementation. And these are some of the agencies that we on the Ledge Committee side do spend some time on. Much of this work, or some of this work, particularly on the PUC side, is handled on the Bay Area side, with actually have some paid staff on the 350 Bay Area side that spends time following proceedings at the PUC, for example. But these are some of the agencies, including Cal Gems that Kathy mentioned. So that's a brief bit of background. Now, here are the bills that I thought I would focus on for tonight's discussion that fall into three general categories that are of interest to you all: building electrification, rooftop and community solar, and there are some additional clean energy bills I've included down there in the bottom right. So with my remaining time, I just want to go through some of these bills individually and share with you. These bills were either already taken a position on in terms of supporting or in a couple of cases opposing. or we're watching very closely. Some of these bills have just started moving, and we're going to have to start. I'm going to have to start juggling on my team. I'm going to start juggling some of these bills, long list of bills that we've been watching, waiting to move, because others aren't moving, and trying to get letters in, support letters or opposition letters, whatever, and getting our supporting actions underway. But to start with, in building electrification, I'd draw your attention to the two bottom bills there about the top left, SB 1482, authored by Senator Allen, and AB 2061, authored by Assemblymember Ting. Both of those relate to EV charging. Allen's bill is addressing creating standards with regard to circuitry requirements for EV charging in multifamily buildings. This would relate to new multifamily buildings. And it's a standardization of looking for standardization of those kinds of requirements for multifamily buildings as they're developed, to help facilitate the use of AVs, of course. Assemblymember Ting's bill is addressing a reliability issue that's come to the attention of a lot of folks in the state with regard to existing EV charging stations, and hopefully having an impact on those stations that are to be developed and installed. There's a study that will be soon published out of UC Davis that describes the results of a survey they recently took in the Bay Area of existing charging stations, and they found that up to 25% of them weren't able to produce a charge for a variety of reasons. So that's an indication of the extent of issues there that this bill is trying to address. So we've actually, it's another team within the Ledge Committee, not my team, is recommending to support that bill, and so and I suspect that'll get approved. So we'll be following that bill and supporting it through the session. And we've already supporting 1482, and it's passed this first committee, is moving on to a second committee now. 1393 is a problem bill that I'm going to be recommending we oppose it. It's already passed. Let's see, it's already passed one committee. It's getting ready to go to another one before ultimately perhaps a floor vote in the Senate. It's a bill sponsored by Senator Archuleta that would require a city of counties who wants to implement a mandate for replacing fossil fuel appliances, replacing basically gas appliances with electric, would require that city or county to first go to the California Energy Commission and file an application requesting a permit for approval to do so. It's being touted as a bill to protect low and moderate income residents, as well as protecting the existing jobs in a community. Those are the two bases on which it's being promoted. But we would see that as an obstacle to communities who want to implement those mandates, while they can also address the issues that's being touted as a reason for passing this bill. Those issues that the supporters of this bill are promoting, those issues can and should be addressed within the ordinances that the city or county would be implementing to do the change outs of these kinds of appliances. So those are three bills that fall within the building electrification area that we're active with. I might draw your attention back down to the bottom right corner, because there's actually a couple other, under the additional clean energy bill heading, a couple other building electrification related bills that had just started moving. One is SB 1203, Senator Becker's bill, that would require state agencies to achieve net zero emissions by 2035 in their operations. And this could have and this would also include addressing the use of natural gas in state agency buildings. So that would have this would indirectly help the building electrification by perhaps supporting getting natural gas out of the need for heating buildings where state agencies are located. That bill has just started moving. There's a hearing coming up on that on the 5th. In another Senator Becker bill, SB 1112, what in the world is tariff on bill financing? Well, that's simply a means by which a ratepayer can utilize the tariff of the utility or CCA that the customer is using for the supply of electricity, utilize the tariff to fund an upgrade at the ratepayer's home, for example, to replace a gas-fired range with an electric range. Tariff on bill financing is a tool utilized in a lot of other states by utilities to provide a tool to ratepayers to fund an upgrade in their house that otherwise they may not have the dollars up front to do so, and they pay it back through their rates. In California needs some legislation to give the PUC the authority to allow utilities to put that kind of program in their tariff. So that's a positive bill as well, we feel. But that bill is still sitting in committee, but hasn't been scheduled for a hearing yet. So I'm not sure what's going on, but it looks like that it's just sitting still right now. Bottom left corner, I'll draw your attention to some rooftop and community solar bills. SB 379 and the two Dodd bills, 833 and 852, we support those bills. 379 would streamline permitting at the local levels for rooftop solar. Senator Wiener had actually introduced a bill last year, SB 99, that became a 2-year bill, rolled over to this year, and for some reason he decided to change the number, and it became 379. Action on this bill won't start until June. It's already cleared its one house of origin, so action on it will take place starting in June after the second round of bills. Second round of review starts on bills that pass their first house, pass their first house. The two Dodd bills, 833 requires city and county jurisdictions to incorporate into their general plans energy resiliency measures to address, for example, in Benicia, where I live, part of the general plan needs to be addressing sea level rise potential issues. Most of the Bay Area communities are in that situation. So 833 would implement that with a specific focus on identifying areas in the community where microgrids would be a solution for energy supply, particularly in the event of disruptions, public service power shutoffs, for example. So it particularly focuses on microgrids. 852 I like to look at, which would allow regional climate districts. 833 establishes the mandate for an energy resiliency plan. In my view, the climate districts that 852 would allow provides a funding mechanism for those city or county jurisdictions to implement some programs by creating a funding mechanism. And the climate districts could be a regional district incorporating multiple cities within a county, or even cross county lines. And it will allow the funding to be done through property tax assessments, which will allow that type of funding mechanism. AB 2133 is a problem bill. And right now it looks to be like what I would refer to perhaps as a spot bill. The language in the bill relates to prevailing wages and when they had to be provided or applied with regard to certain kinds of projects. Solar isn't, at this time anyway, isn't actually mentioned in the bill, but I've been alerted that the purpose of this bill is to require prevailing wages for solar projects greater than 15 kW. What size is 15 kW? Well, the house my wife and I live in is a 1,366 square foot house. We have rooftop solar, and our system is 4.75. So that gives you an idea of 15. It's not. It wouldn't. This bill wouldn't impact rooftop solar installations on single family dwellings, but it would impact probably most any kind of solar project on a multifamily dwelling or bigger. And while prevailing wages we like to support in concept, this is an example of a bill that's probably trying to implement a provision too broadly over an industry that this type of provision would need to be introduced in stages, perhaps, if in fact it's a relevant issue. But that's a bill on our watch, and we're trying to still doing some research on it to find out exactly where it's headed. And then finally, I'll mention up in the top right-hand corner of the slide, Kathy's already mentioned the setback rulemaking ongoing at Cal Gems. And she's already mentioned the vision webinar on April 6th. and Julie has the link for that webinar. That the webinar, Vision is the major organization that's focusing on this bill, and we 350 Bay Area Action are one of many groups in the state supporting Vision in this effort. And the final rule on this bill, I've been told, is expected near the end of, or sometime in the fall. So at the webinar on April 6th, they'll be sharing information with everyone, with groups and individuals about what can be done now to further influence the review that's ongoing within CalGEMS about the development of this rule. And there are a series of recommendations that Vision has presented to CalGEMS that they believe needs to be added to the drafts that have been presented by CalGEMS to make that proposed rulemaking even stronger. And then I'll mention finally, with regard to rooftop solar, the ongoing docket at the Public Utilities Commission that you've probably heard about, where initially the utilities back in I guess early 21 made their own proposals about updating NEM, the net energy metering tariff, creating the doctors refer to as NEM 3.0, which will be the new NEM tariff. What does the NEM tariff do? It, among other things, establishes the amount that a customer receives back from the utility or the CCA for the electricity it's supplying to the grid that it doesn't need at its house. So among other things, the NEM tariff establishes that price that you get or that's credited towards your account. The utility provisions of utility proposals back at when they first introduced them were horrendous, establishing monthly fixed fees for rooftop solar customers, among other things. And then the PUC came out with a proposed decision, I believe it was scheduled at the end of January. And because of all the, and in part because of all the feedback they got from residents in California that was created as a result of numerous action campaigns by 350 Bay Area Action and other statewide groups, addressing the problems in the proposed decision, which reflected too much of what the utilities had initially proposed. So the PUC pulled that decision from their agenda. And that's where we are right now. And we're waiting for a new proposed decision to come out. And we have no indication yet when that's going to happen. So that's an indication of some of the bills that my clean energy team is looking at with regard to these three general areas of issues. As I said, some were already supporting or opposing. Others were on the verge of having to do so because of the movement of the bills. So if anyone wants some additional information on any of these individual bills, I can share that with Julie and can forward that to you in terms of fact sheets or any analyses that we've done at the Bay Area Action side to share with our folks and or to share with legislators about why we're arguing for or against a particular bill. Happy to share that with you. And with that, I'll return the mic back to Bob.
Thank you so much, Ralph. That was really an interesting presentation, and we so appreciate your work and the great work of 350 and working on all these different fronts. To round out our panel, I'm very pleased to welcome back Will Barrett, who's the Director of Advocacy and Clean Air at the American Lung Association. He leads ALA's work on clean air and climate change policy in California, focusing on vehicle emission standards, smart growth, and clean fuels policies. He also represents the American Lung Association before the California legislature and federal, state, regional, and local agencies. He also serves on the climate plan and the board of directors for the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies. And I know it's been a very busy day for Will. I started off my day this morning in a session that ALA organized and Will participated in, announcing the new report from ALA zeroing in on healthy air. It was just released and looks like an excellent and useful report. and which itself focused on the importance of zero emission electric vehicles. So that being said, Will, pleased to have you with us again and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much, Bob. I really appreciate it, and great to be back with the group again. Certainly appreciate the opportunity and all the great information that has been shared already so far tonight. So I'll be talking a little bit about transportation, some of the legislative policies that we're focusing on, and then some of the state regulatory policies we're working on, and then some that actually tie into the federal policies as well. And I'll try to move quickly through kind of three key things that I want to talk about. Smart growth or healthy communities. That's the first couple of bills that I'll talk about. Zero emission transportation policies. I'll flag that new report that Bob kindly raised for me. And then what's called the state implementation plan at the California Air Resources Board. There are two major plans going forward at the board. One of them is specific to achieving ozone standards, and then another one related to climate pollution. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those. First of all, I wanted to say that transportation is the leading source of harmful air pollution in California. It's about 80% of all of the smog forming emissions in the state. And we know just how damaging the transportation sector is. California has 7 of the 10 most ozone polluted cities in the United States, 6 of the 10 most polluted by fine particles. The Bay Area shows up on our annual list of the most polluted cities in the United States, appearing on the top 10 list for ozone and particle pollution. And really 98% of Californians live in a community that's impacted by ozone and or particle pollution, nearly everyone. But we know that we've got significant disparities in pollution burdens in the state of California. And so a lot of the policies that I want to talk about will help to address some of the disparities in pollution burdens, often concentrated in lower income communities and communities of color in our state, and putting everyone's health at risk, but especially those most impacted. The first couple of policies I wanted to highlight really stem from this concept of smart growth and moving to more active transportation, giving people real transportation choices, and building communities for healthier transportation. We know from the state's greenhouse gas emissions inventory that comes out every year, the most recent report showed the increase in vehicle miles traveled or driving is pushing up greenhouse gas emissions, and actually that increased driving is cutting into the benefits of zero emission transportation, cutting into the benefits of cleaner fuels, cleaner cars. And we know that we have to address not just the engines, but how much they're used in California to get people around. And so a big symptom of that is sprawling communities that are built primarily for getting people's cars around, regardless of how many people are in them, and regardless of how short that trip is, and whether it's safe to take another means, walking, biking, or even transit to get around. So that's kind of the first batch of things I want to talk about. And really the issue is our transportation investments are not necessarily tied to health outcomes or climate protective outcomes. So the state, California State Transportation Agency last year adopted what's called the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI. And this is a new framework that really seeks to align transportation investments with reductions in carbon pollution, improving public health, addressing equity issues, and building more sustainable communities and a more sustainable transportation sector. The two bills that I want to talk about in this category are both by Laura Friedman, Assembly Bill 2237 and Assembly Bill 2438. Assembly Bill 2237 really is trying to support implementation of what are called sustainable community strategies, which under previous state law, Senate Bill 375 from 2008, basically was implemented and has not had the effect of improving land use and transportation planning in the state. So we're actually not making a dent and actually moving in the wrong direction on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicle trips. So this bill would basically say, we're going to do a lot of different consultation process. We're going to make sure that we're analyzing past investments and really seeing, are those past investments aligned with our new climate framework, that cap type program that I mentioned. And if not, we're going to restrict spending on projects and basically say you can't fund regional projects that actually increase or go in the wrong direction compared to where that cap type framework is going. So that bill passed its first committee this week and is now on to its next committee, the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. The next bill by Laura Friedman, who's actually the chair of the Transportation Committee, is AB 2438. And this is basically to take that cap type framework and make sure that state transportation funding is actually lining up, or the standards for distributing that state funding are actually lined up with that framework that was adopted. And there are a lot of state agencies involved in that bill and, and rolling it out, assuming it passes. But again, really trying to get to the heart of the problem that our land use and transportation decisions are really not lining up with where we need to go for our climate. So AB 2237, AB 2438, both by Laura Friedman, both passed their committee this week and are on to their next committee. The next thing I want to talk about are the zero emission transportation policies. And yes, we did announce or release a new report today called Zeroing In on Healthy Air. And in that report, we envision all passenger vehicles in the United States would be zero emission, sold as zero emission vehicles by 2035, and all heavy duty trucks no later than 2040, and couple that with a clean non-combustion renewable energy grid by 2035. So ambitious but achievable targets that we think are needed to really move the ball forward on clean air and climate protection. The report came out. We saw over $1 trillion in public health benefits at the national level. In the Bay Area, we broke it down and saw a cumulative total benefit of $42.5 billion by making these changes. And that cumulative total is between 2020 and 2050. So a 30-year window, right in the middle of that is when we hit 100% sales of passenger vehicles and heavy duty trucks, as well as the clean grid. So major public health benefits. That came out to nearly 4,000 lives saved over the course of that time period in the Bay Area, as well as over 100,000 asthma attacks avoided in the Bay Area, just through that transition to cleaner technologies. Some of the bills that we're working on, or one of the bills that we're working on right now, I appreciated hearing about the infrastructure bills a little bit more, but this one is Senate Bill 1010 by Senator Skinner, Bay Area representative, who basically is looking to require increased percentage of the state fleet going to zero emissions. So state public agencies, as they roll new vehicles into their fleet, this would set new targets for light duty vehicles purchased by the state would have to, half of them would have to be zero emission by 2024, and 100% of new vehicles sold into the state fleet, 100% by 2026. And for heavy duty, it's 50% of the vehicles sold into the state fleet or purchased by the state fleet would be zero emission by 2025 and 100% by 2028. So these both build off previous legislation that we supported at the Lung Association, and really looking to accelerate that transition, show the state's leadership and building their own fleet as zero emission. So that bill, again, Senate Bill 1010, passed its first committee and is on to the Senate Environmental Quality Committee next. And certainly appreciate that there are opportunities for health groups to endorse this and move forward to really put their stamp on it. So always appreciate the support. The next item, Kathy touched on this a little bit, the state budget. And really what I want to kind of point to is here in the chat, we have endorsed both of our organizations, PSR Bay Area chapter and the Lung Association have endorsed this budget perspective that really seeks to maintain a strong focus on funding zero emission transportation investments, including really increasing the investments in what are called equity-based programs. So programs that are targeted to lower income communities who experience higher levels of pollution, and really making sure that nobody's left behind in this transition to zero emission transportation. So the link that's in the chat will take you to the page where you can read up on the letter and look to join. As I said, the host organization here tonight and the Lung Association have endorsed this, and many others have gotten behind this and really trying to push for these heavy investments in equity-based programs in the state budget for zero emission vehicles, as well as programs that we want to see go run in parallel to zero emission trucks, for example. Really look at ways that the state budget can fund the retirement of the oldest, dirtiest trucks that are on the road. These are trucks that are old enough where they don't even have onboard diagnostic programs to tell you when the engine isn't running properly. So there's a push there, and a lot of health organizations have made this push, and we're trying to really make the case that while we're putting zero emission trucks in at the front end, we have to be retiring those oldest dirty diesels at the back end. So again, for the budget perspective, you can read up on the investingcleanair.com page and see all the groups supporting that budget ask that's really rooted in equity. Two quick things that the State Air Resources Board is working on as far as zero emission vehicles go. We've got the Advanced Clean Cars program, and basically under the Federal Clean Air Act, California has the authority to set stronger than national standards. You might have heard recently that the Biden administration kind of undid some of the bad things that the Trump administration did as far as trying to undermine California's authority under the Clean Air Act. So California's authority and their ability to implement stronger standards was all restored, and we're moving forward. And now California is actually moving to set new emission standards that we have, basically push us to 100% sales of zero emission vehicles in California by 2035. We're pushing on different policy elements of that to make sure it's as strong and equitable as possible, especially in the early years of the program, so that we don't get to 2035 and see we have to really struggle to catch up to that 100% target. So there's more on that we can certainly discuss later. And then on the heavy duty truck side, there's the Advanced Clean Fleet program. And that program kind of builds off of a major policy that California adopted, and now 5 other states have adopted California's program. And that pushes towards higher and higher levels of zero emission heavy duty trucks. So this new program, the Advanced Clean Fleets program, is going to be heard later this year, and basically looking to set a 100% truck sales standard in California. And we're trying to, again, push the agency to make that more ambitious, more health protective, more equitable, as they get to the final rule. So there'll be a hearing in June on the Advanced Clean Cars program, and a hearing later this year on the Advanced Clean Fleet program. And we'll try to generate opportunities for groups to get involved. One last thing on the zero emission space, and then you'll see in the chat too, Julie, thank you very much for populating the chat. There is a ballot measure now being circulated, the Clean Cars, Clean Air ballot measure. The Lung Association has endorsed this, the Coalition for Clean Air, several of our good friends in the environmental community have supported this. And basically what it's Union of Concerned Scientists as well are looking at. Essentially, we want this ballot measure to, we want this petition to get on the ballot so people can vote. And the outcome of this would be a fractional marginal personal income tax on any personal income over $2 million annually would be directed to funding zero emission transportation programs and wildfire reduction strategies. So major clean air benefits out of this program. And what it's trying to do is really focus investments in the zero emission space, especially on a combination of incentive programs as well as the infrastructure needed to support zero emission transportation broadly. And that's light duty, heavy duty, school buses, transit buses, and directing half of those funds to lower income communities to make sure, again, that there's an equitable distribution of the benefits of zero emission transportation, that it's accessible, and again, making sure that all communities benefit. So there's more information on that. The link is in the chat. And again, it's at cleanairca.org. And we'll be doing a push to encourage health organizations to join the Lung Association in supporting this. And hopefully we'll get a good push towards the ballot in November. The last item I wanted to flag again, the California Air Resources Board has two important plans underway. One of them is called the Climate Change Scoping Plan, and this lays out a pathway to achieving California's 2030 climate targets. And so this takes into account all sorts of sources of pollution and what needs to happen with each to make sure we're moving forward and reducing our emissions to meet that 2030 standard that's set in state law. So that's one element. And then the other one that I wanted to highlight, I think is probably maybe more on the wonky side and less followed maybe by a lot of groups, is the state implementation plan. This is, it's called the SIP for short. And basically what it is a plan that comes around every so often, every few years, where the state has to lay out how we're going to meet our clean air or ozone standards in this case, and then approve the plan along with local air district plans and submit that to US EPA to demonstrate we have a plan to attain our national ambient air quality standards. So this will cover a lot of the things we heard about today. Passenger vehicles, heavy duty trucks, smart growth is included, off-road equipment, including getting appliances to zero emissions to reduce regional NOx emissions or ozone pollution emissions, and then looking at federal sources of or sources that are controlled by the federal government. So typically you think of these as interstate trucking, the railroads, aviation sources, and marine sources. So there's just a wide range of policies that are needed to achieve our ozone standards. A lot of them are going to be taken up in California, but we also need to put pressure on the federal government to act quickly to reduce those sources that are in California, but that are controlled by the federal government. So with that, I will add one thing to the chat, and that is just a link to our page for the American Lung Association's health network for health professionals for clean air and climate action. And basically what that is a way to stay involved with the Lung Association and tune into some of our meetings and get on our mailing list so that you can maybe review and sign on to some of our advocacy letters on everything that I just talked about for probably too long. So I'll leave it there, and thank you again, and happy to take questions as we go. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Will. And I just really think all the presentations have been great and really complemented each other very well. So we're going to open it up for Q&A. I know that there's been a number of questions and comments that have come through the chat, and I would encourage people, after having heard all the speakers together, to add more questions that we could pick up. So I'll turn it over to Julie to start that off, if you're picking some stuff off the chat.
Yes, sure. Hello. Thank you again, Kathy, Ralph, and Will. What a fantastic lineup. We're so grateful for all your time and efforts and expertise. We have a question from Marin County League of Women Voters. What about agricultural efforts toward carbon sequestration? Anyone, you know, even if you're not one of our speakers, if you're a guest and you happen to have information about that, please feel free to speak up.
Well, I can start. So the last thing that Will, or the next to last thing that Will talked about was the scoping plan that's going on at the California Air Resources Board. So that's a planning process that will lead to rulemaking and guide efforts for the next 5 years. And it has a natural and working lands sector part to the plan. And that is looking at the value and the importance of maintaining, conserving, and expanding our natural working lands, including agriculture and other lands as well. And they've been doing modeling. So that's in the rulemaking or in the planning process over at the Air Resources Board. And it's quite involved. They're doing intensive modeling of what's even the capacity of land, different kinds of land types around the state of California, including wetlands, in sequestering carbon and what those processes look like for the future. I'm sure there are some bills in the legislature, but I'm not tracking those right now. But there's a lot of discussion going on in the scoping plan process around regenerative agriculture, use of more organic agriculture, and less pesticides. So there's a lot of work going on there.
Thank you, Kathy. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I
Great.
think the question came when Kathy was talking about carbon sequestration as a false climate solution. And I think the person who asked the question just wanted to clarify that perhaps natural carbon sequestration should be part of climate solutions.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And speaking of carbon, I'm going to post a link to an event about carbon capture that's coming up in the chat. And Marjana, you had raised your hand. Do you have another question, or
Oh, I had a question, but Ralph wanted to ask something.
What?
Sorry, Ralph, did you?
No.
You know, I've been kind of, I've been just overwhelmed by how California legislators are so influenced by the big money. And I was just wondering the fact that the Democratic Party passed this rule that they can't get any donations from oil and gas. If any of you feel that may kind of help us a little bit or not, because you know, as the bill go through committee to the committee, they just get worse and worse. So I just don't know if any of that is going to get better or not.
Well, the oil industry is a large contributor to politicians in California. They're one of the largest lobby groups in Sacramento. They have a lot of power. And one of the reasons we weren't able to pass in the legislature the setback bill was because both oil industry opposed it and moderate Democrats who tend to take more money from corporate donors, including the oil industry, and the building trades who have aligned themselves to a large extent with the oil industry. So it's quite complex in terms of the politics of it and how that leads to kind of obstacles in getting legislation passed. So it's true that it's a big thing in California politics.
Yeah, I would just simply add that no, it's a major problem and very discouraging. But I guess I would, and with regard to what the state party has done, I don't have the language in front of me, but my recollection is there's a huge hole in the middle of the resolution they passed that that upset a lot of folks who wanted something much more substantive. So I don't think I guess my point is I don't believe whatever the party passed has any direct impact on the obstacles that Kathy has experienced much more than I have, given her experiences in the legislature. But it's a major issue between the fossil fuel industry and the utilities, and an amount of money that they have. It's very difficult.
We have another question from Dr. Robin Cooper. And this question is for Kathy. Are there any legislative efforts specifically directed at mental health and climate change? What are the agencies that might deal with this?
So thanks, Robin. That's a great question. So there's, as I mentioned in my slides, there's growing interest and attention being paid to climate resilience and climate adaptation because it's already here and we're already having to deal with the consequences of our changing climate, which has a huge impact physically, mentally, in terms of health, productivity, jobs, and equity. So I'm not aware of any bills per se that have been introduced this year, but the climate resilience, there was a lot of money put into the budget last year at the very end of the legislative session last year for a community resilience project that the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and Greenlining Institute, two leading environmental justice groups in the state, have been helping to lead, and that planning is going on under the Office of Planning and Research. And that seems to be a place where both community and individual mental health and capacity building for resilience could get raised. It's a very iterative process because the planning, this hasn't been done before, at least not for climate change. And it introduces a lot of new factors, whether it's wildfire or smoke or loss of housing due to climate impact. So I think there's going to be some opportunity to bring up and engage perhaps mental health professionals in that climate resilience planning process.
Great.
Thank you, Kathy.
Cynthia Mahoney has a question. She says, thank you for all the great information. Can you talk about how changes are made to bills and how physicians can make sure they aren't supporting a bill that's been changed to be less positive?
Will, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, all throughout the process, there's a potential for that. At the committee, going into committees, there's often discussions around a bill. In order to get the bill out, there may be a compromise made to the bill that might have to water down something or take an element out of it that changes the texture of the bill, for example. And so that is kind of, part of the challenge is that, if you're not following it day to day, you might miss that until the committee hearing happens. But really, once the committee happens, you're going to see the amendments that are taken, either, in advance, maybe in the bill analysis that goes, with the committee hearing, or, during the discussion, an author of a bill can make the changes and say, we'll agree to work with you on these changes. And then they'll work on them in the next committee or, prior to the next committee. So it is a stepwise process that happens that often really takes, if you have a bill that you really, really care about, it's important to kind of follow all of that paper trail that goes along with it, all the bill analysis, all of the discussion in the committee hearings, and then just talking to the author's staff about the bill and just making sure that, in my experience, you talk to the staff in the legislature, they try to be as open and honest about what's coming in the bill as soon as they can, so that what's coming and you don't wind up, nobody wants to have their supporters pull off a bill because they're surprised by a change, right? So that's something that, the communication with the office is really important. And then it comes down to tracking. And I think that's where some of the coalitions, the groups like PSR can really help with noting those changes for folks along the way.
Yeah, and I would add to that, one of the benefits of keeping in touch with the author's office is, and all of them don't do this, but some of the offices will set up a communications link between the staff person handling the bill and supporters of the bill. So, and then you have a communications link, whether it's via text or email, whatever, that is one way of being alerted about an amendment. That's very, very effective and saves a little time for you if the bill is being sponsored by has been authored by a senator or assembly member who has staff people that sets that kind of link up. Extremely helpful.
Mike Martin also has raised a question in the chat to raise. It might be most focused for Will, but certainly welcome everybody else's input. Mike's asking, what, if anything, is being done regarding mandating electrification of school buses? That has so many obvious benefits, which he lists. One is less air pollution exposure for kids. 2, eliminating fossil fuel use. And 3, stabilization of the grid by feeding power back to the grid during high use times. Interested in our panelists' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Bob. And Mike, thanks for the question. Certainly, you've hit all the high points of, not all, but many of the high points about why this is so important. And there is a new bill that was just, I think, introduced Friday, or the language was updated on Friday. Let me just pull it up. Assembly Bill 2731 by Mr. Ting. And basically, this requires all new school buses in California to be zero emission by 2035, and also does some changes to the leasing structure to give more leeway to the school districts that are bringing these on board. So that, sorry, that's a bill that I think is worth checking out. There's also in the bipartisan infrastructure package, there was $2.5 billion put forward for electric school buses or zero emission school buses. There's also a proposal in the California budget for $1.5 billion grant program to help school districts purchase electric school buses and associated charging stations. So I think that there's, certainly a lot of awareness. I wish I had, time to dig it up, but maybe in the after the follow-up, the Lung Association put out a Wheels on the Bus video talking about the benefits of zero emission school buses within the context of the federal spending programs. And, it's a high priority for our organization. We're definitely gonna be taking a close look at the bill and seeing what other ways there are to really accelerate this transition. So great question and happy to follow up.
Thank you. Any more questions? Just raise your hand or post it in the chat. Great. Okay. Well, perhaps we should wrap it up then. I want to encourage all of you to join us on April 27th for our Building Electrification, Climate, Health, and Equity event. I put the link in the chat, and it will also be in our events email that will go out tomorrow. So keep your eyes out for that. And I want to thank Ralph and Kathy and Will again for taking time out of their busy schedules to come educate us, and hand it over to Bob for a couple last words.
Thanks so much, Julie. And really want to thank our panel again and for all who've attended tonight. We're obviously in such a terrible situation with the horrible war in Ukraine, which is, lying offshore, as we're talking about these very concrete ways that we could move forward in California. But, just as some concluding remarks, just to note that a lot of the things that we are trying to do here, particularly when we're talking about the budgets, are facing real challenges in terms of $100 billion extra in military budgets that have been approved over what President Biden requested last year. And at the same time, there are inordinate pressures on us in terms of the renewed push to pump more oil and gas that is obviously going to have impacts on all of our work. So as we wrap up, I don't know, I had actually meant to raise this earlier, but as we finish up here, if anybody has any thoughts about that, either among our panelists or the audience as well, in terms of how we deal with this before we wrap up.
I think I think it's so heavy and exhausting. We're all tired.
Yeah. I know, but I just did want to mark it because it is sort of the elephant in the room that I think we're in one way or another. We're going to have to deal with it, and certainly PSR is going to have its eyes on that as well in terms of our ongoing work. So without getting into the heavy coda here, I just again want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and looking forward to continuing our work through the coming year. Thanks for being here.
And I just want to
Thank
shout
you.
out to our amazing intern, Jasmine Campos. Thank you, Jasmine, for being in the background, managing the event tonight.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.